I'm actually going to start with a question that I thought about.
Oh, why don't we start with one you haven't thought about?
I thought about, but that is not on the list. Sort of like a personal question with universal significance. And so, because of being on the spectrum and just my ethics, I'm very much focused on truth. I try to always be as truthful as possible and also expect it from others. And along with that, I hate hypocrisy, even in myself. But on the other hand, I've noticed certain contradictions that I have. So, for instance, I'm very, very much in favor of universal health care, but at the same time, I'm extremely against overpopulation. And universal healthcare would lead to more population.
I don't think it works that way. I think one of the things Bill Gates learned is that better healthcare results in a decrease in population.
And populations tend to have fewer and fewer children if all their children are surviving. And generally, people who are more prosperous and happy, more prosperous anyway, tend to have fewer children. Also, universal health care might make it, just incredibly easy for people to take birth control medicines.
We interrupted you, say, and eventually we want to get back to that ethics matrix.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I'm well aware of what both of you are saying, and it's applicable very much so in Western Europe, but there are other places where increased access to food and healthcare has resulted in population explosions, but without decrease in the population rate. At any rate, it's still theoretically a contradiction, or the fact that I am a true believer in freedom and, political anarchy of sorts. But on the other hand, going back to the whole overpopulation and environmentalism thing, I'd be like, all right, we got to get ourselves down. Let's force sterilize half the population and make everyone into a vegan.
Hey, I know which half.
Or, another example, I'm the member of a tariqa that's, part of the most monotheistic of all religions, but at heart I'm a pagan that sees gods and feels gods everywhere and believes in tree nymphs. And how can one resolve these contradictions in a way that respects oneself and is intellectually and emotionally honest?
I see your problem, and I can tell you what the answer is.
What?
All right.
They're not resolvable. Don't try to resolve them. Live with them, enjoy them, celebrate them, appreciate them. You can't resolve them. Stop trying.
Well, and if you settle on one thing out of those three, it's going to be incomplete.
Yeah.
So any one expression is leaving something out. So live with ambiguity.
Ambiguity tends to rather focus on the differences, which can be worth appreciating.
Right. And accepting ambiguity is also being more open to possibility. So
I think we were talking about something like this last time, and we settled on the assumption that some things are supposed to be mysterious. And that's one reason we exist, is because of these mysteries. Not everything is supposed to be black and white, and a lot of it is gray.
Yeah.
And how much time and energy and language and ink and dead trees have been given to trying to parse the differences of things and reconcile them that are at the very limit of the expressible.
Well, and also to insist that you can resolve this thing is to insist that you can completely understand. And that's to limit reality.
That's true. That's right.
That's to limit reality to yourself, to your lowercase self.
Right.
So go with it. If it feels right to you to approach things from these different perspectives and see how well they account for or describe your experience, go ahead and enjoy them. As long as you don't lose sight of the fact that ultimately there's only one or not two, and you don't exactly know what it is, which is fine. There's always more to know.
Which is fine.
So I wouldn't worry too much about it. I mean, I go back and forth between Christianity and Islam. I have those 2 points of view in my own experience. And I look at things one or the other at various times, depending on just how it presents itself, knowing that ultimately there isn't a contradiction there. There's just things I don't understand. And the limits of language, of course. It's important to know that you don't know.
Well said.
And as I brought up last time, the quote from Heraclitus where he said, Homer was wrong when he prayed, "Oh, gods, let strife depart from the world," because he was unknowingly praying for the destruction of all things. And so maybe, you know what, roll with it, because strife is good. And just psychologically speaking, people that I've noticed and seen that try to fit their round-pegged self into the square hole of anything holy, it tends to be psychically very debilitating for them. It's good, of course, to learn from a tradition, from Islam or whatever tradition it may be. But if you try to become a cookie cutter Muslim or a cookie cutter Republican or a cookie cutter anything, you're actually achieving nothingness in a bad way.
Yeah, I mean, to define yourself is always dangerous.
Yeah.
All right. So what is the role of language in religiosity? And can one be religious without language?
Can one be religious without language?
Yes.
Well, you can be, but it's a little hard to express.
Right. I think you could live a rich spiritual life without language, but, if there were some way that somebody could know something about your life, that would be a communication. It might be facial expressions. It might be, something or other. But without any kind of language, we're all just going solo here. And wisdom can't be preserved, passed on.
Right.
I would say that you definitely do not need language to have a conception of God. Sometimes language gets in the way. If you look at some of the 20,000-year-old or however old Paleolithic cave paintings, some of them are deeply religious from a period where people didn't have any language to speak of or that we know of. But yet they were able to put forth into these cave walls an authentic spiritual experience of sorts that I think most of us would be hard-pressed to do. So in that sense, if we can accept that without our modern conceptions of language that you can be spiritual, what is the role of language on the path, and how can language help or hinder us?
Well, language, of course, can give us insight and incentive and can communicate to us not only ideas, but often a kind of harmonic resonance. And I'm thinking about things like poetry that provides a finger pointing at the moon.
Yeah. Also, the conscious use of symbols, assuming, or even for that matter, the ecstatic expression of symbols, is a kind of language. Whether somebody else can understand it or not is another story, but it's an expression. And I suspect a lot of the people that lived in the cave art felt that it spoke to them. That makes it a language. And I doubt that the people who made those paintings didn't know anything about language. I don't think they just grunted around.
Yes, and I think you would agree, State of Madrid, yes?
Yes. I mean, I'm someone that personally believes that all things have their language. I think it's incredibly hubristic to think that language is something that only they have. I believe that the dogs can communicate, horses, dolphins. Hell, I think even trees have a way of communicating with one another.
Yes, they do.
They do.
They do. They do.
And they may do it through an intermediary like a fungus, which just shows that there's interspecies communication too.
There's an excellent TED Talk, which I saw in person, about how trees communicate, and they really do.
Yeah.
They even work together.
And there's few scenes in the Iliad with horses of the gods that have the ability to communicate and show emotion. But I ventured the guess that, horses are pretty high-level intelligent creatures. I would say for a lot of the people in the past, whoever they might be, certainly some of the more nomadic peoples of the Mongolian steppe, they could communicate with their horses. Maybe not, in Mongolian tongue, but they had ways of communicating. And again, it's to say, if someone is mute and deaf and they use sign language, is it to say that that's not language? Of course it is.
Yeah.
Just because an animal can't speak our words doesn't mean that they cannot speak to us.
Well, yeah, there's communication, and then there's language, which is you can be formalized in some way. But there may be forms that come naturally to different species, and it's possible for that to communicate between them and also with other species if there's exposure, so you can learn what things mean. But the thing about, you can have spirituality without language, but there's something about religion that requires you to have some contact with your neighbor, some communication.
Yes, and I think language is one of the many ways of expression. It has a connotation that it has to be verbal, but sometimes language is also in the form of dance and art. But I see it as any other mode of communication, and likely so animals have a mode of communication, plants have it, everything communicates to each other. And so language is just one of those modes of expression.
Yeah, I agree. Nothing stands alone. Indra's web has to have something connecting it.
Some of the problem, of course, is that we've stopped listening.
Well, yes, of course. So we have.
I think that's a lot of the problem. I think we need to learn how to see again and hear again, to slow down and listen to things. A large part of what Stephen Clark and David Bentley Hart are all about, talking about this, that, we need fairies. Whether or not they are corporeally true and existent is irrelevant. We need conception of wonder, and we need to open our eyes and ears and noses to all of these other things that are going on around us that we used to be aware of and no longer are aware of.
Well, that's true.
Is it possible to attain to a state of awareness above and beyond the constructs of language, art, music, or math? And if so, what would that state look like?
First part of the question is yes. Answer to the second part is impossible to say.
Right. Otherwise, you could say it.
Would you express that in art or math or language or music? Because you've already defined it being above the constructs of language.
Right, exactly.
Exactly. The second part was a bit of a trick question.
Oh, we figured it out. And maybe to dilate on the first part, yes, certainly awareness is above language.
Right, it's fundamental.
Yes.
It's that in which language, art, and music and math appear.
Yes, right.
So guess which one is more fundamental? And to say what's possible for awareness is probably risky business.
I think if I can say, I think awareness is something that has to be experienced.
Yes.
It's hard to express it, but it's not hard to experience it.
No, and in fact, you don't experience anything else, or there wouldn't be an experience.
So is what all of you are saying is that on the next full moon, we should all go out and become werewolves?
Why wait until the next full moon?
Yes, why wait for that moon?
Let's try it now.
Right. Of course, I suppose you could be, aware of anything, but I like the way it sounds.
Yes, me too. Me too.
I may have occasion to use that sometime.
You're free to use it.
Why, thank you.
Thank you.
With the first in-person modulus in quite some time having recently taken place, how do you feel the community has grown or changed over the past year and a half?
Well, in many ways, I'm pleased we still have a community after a year and a half.
True.
And that our people are interested in getting together and praying together and sharing what there is to share, and still have some interest in being a community, which I think is a nice affirmation.
Well, it is. I think it may be that the community has, or at least our part, has grown in the direction of taking simultaneously accepting the will of God, but taking more responsibility for how we tread the path.
Very good. I think that's right.
It's no longer buy your ticket, get on the train, and arrive in paradise.
Yes, that's right. And there's a lot less concern about who's allowed to climb the mountain with us. Do they have the right shoes? And,
Which is a good thing.
Yes, which is a good thing.
Yes.
We've sort of come together in many ways with a, thank God we're done with all of that kind of attitude.
Yes. So there's more freedom.
Yes.
Getting free of the bonds of whatever is freedom.
Indeed. She's reading ahead, but would you like to comment on the community?
Yes. it caught my eyes. I think the next question is very interesting, but I think the last year and a half gave everybody an opportunity for introspection. When we couldn't meet in person, we met with ourselves. And so that has brought about a very subtle change from looking at what's right and what's wrong to looking at what is this all about and what does this mean to me or personally. And I've seen and noticed the type of questions, we still get questions, but the type of questions that we now get are different to, let's say, am I progressing on the spiritual path?
Right.
So there is a subtle inquiry happening, and I wonder why, but there is a subtle inquiry that's happening in everybody's journey, which is a really good thing.
It is. You know, that thing about excessive concern about one's spiritual progress, that's an important thing. You know, it's not indifference, but, you know, it makes your path a problem. So who needs that? You know, you discover what the path is as you go along, and you may not know, you know, how your progress is. I don't know if I've mentioned this before, but a couple of years ago, I spoke with Guy Finley, and I said, you know, it seems less and less important to me whether I'm making progress on the path. And he said, now that's progress. I thought that was cute.
Well said, indeed.
And he smiled, of course.
It's a bit like walking on an actual path. The important thing isn't where you're going. The important thing is to have awareness while you're on your journey, while you're on the path. More often than not, wherever you're going is a letdown, but if you pay attention while you're on a walk or on a hike in some beautiful place, there's so much wonder. Everything is wonderful. And I've seen this too often. I've seen it with people hiking that they gear up and they focus so much on getting up the hill as quick as possible, taking pictures and getting down the hill. But I don't care there have been many times that I've never gotten where I'm going because I take so much time marveling at all the little things that I come across on the way there. And I think that's important for the spiritual path as well. If you focus too hard on where you're going, you're never going to get there unless it's by the grace of God. But if you actually enjoy the journey, things will come to you.
Right. Yeah. The thing of, you know, you talked about reaching the destination and finding it disappointing. But I think if you've enjoyed the journey to wherever, I mean, as if there's a final stopping place, but if you've really been present to the process of moving in that direction, I don't think you'll be disappointed. I think, you know, in the process, you gain a kind of appreciation that you can't be disillusioned from.
Would like to get to the next question.
Before we get to that one, just one other thing. The great book, Mount Analog by René Daumal, where he wrote sort of a fictional travelogue to a mythical island, contains the mountain where, you know, that's an analog to the spiritual path. He didn't finish the book. And I think, though it wasn't intentional, it's so perfect because so many times we talk about the goal in the path. We talk about the end of the path. There is no goal. There is no end. You're always on the path. And that's the thing. If there was one goal, one end, and it was completely static, that actually would be death. And that's not true because God is not static. God is not some massive piece of gold or lead in the sky. God is pure radiance, being and becoming all one. It's the transcendence of both. And as such, there's always the path. And if we're on the path here and now, then we're already where we need to be. That's what I say.
Yes. You know, I think I read some of Mount Analog. I have some images and memories about that. But it's a great idea, you know, Mount Analog. But the whole thing about reaching a destination might start with the question, why am I not there now? Not why am I not yet there, but how is it that I know I'm not there now? What lies between me and what I imagine the destination is? Is it anything other than me? Yeah, anyway.
How could it be?
I don't know.
Before we get on to the next question, I'd just like to say to Badria, these are particularly good questions this evening.
Oh, thank you.
Yes, they seem to be fertile.
I put extra large amounts of phosphorus in these questions.
No wonder it works.
They're burning brightly.
So, the question that Saida Zainab you've been waiting for, do religions have anything to learn from the corporate world?
Well, I can start unless anybody wants to go first.
No, I
Go
would
ahead.
like you to go first.
So I recently learned that just like business is a work of art, religion too is actually a work of art.
Yeah.
Except that in this case, it's the work of God's art.
Right, and the medium, of course, is oneself in a larger sense than just individual.
Right.
In many ways, you just really have to see the art being manifested rather than created explicitly. But, things evolve organically. And I think religions, maybe the only thing they need to learn from the corporate world is, in the corporate world, people seem, whether they're right or not, they have some sense of why they're doing what they're doing.
Yeah, that's right.
What is, they usually only quantify things in terms of dollars, but,
Well, good ones at least have identifiable mission statements.
yes.
And I think the good ones have some shared sense of overall accomplishment come good for all who participate and maybe even for those who don't.
Yeah. Well, and also there's artistry in life and there's artistry in business. And I think if you're really going to enjoy business, it has to be artistic, not just clever and strenuous.
And another thing I would say, if I could swap maybe religion with spirituality and say, does spirituality or religion have anything to learn from the corporate world? It would be, in corporations, we all know you get what you put in. And so things are taken more seriously. But in religion and spirituality, we somehow lack that, or we forget that we're only going to get something that as much as we put in. So that notion of accountability, which is taken very seriously in the corporate world, spirituality and religion could benefit from that.
Yes, it's a kind of objectivity. Even just the bottom line is a kind of objectivity. So, yeah, there's something to learn.
Yeah, I mean, it's about taking ownership and becoming accountable for one's own spiritual development.
I think Theta Zainab has been reading one of my favorite business artists.
That's right.
I don't know a lot about the corporate world, but I would say that there are two things that stand out to me. One is that you have a lot of businesses now that have codes of ethics, some of which try to be really responsible citizens of the planet. And I think some of the various religious communities could learn from that because, it's tiring to hear about different scandals and whatnot. But on the other hand, not necessarily the corporate world, I liken religions today, the big religions, to like Microsoft or Amazon or AT&T back in the day. And on the other hand, I personally want to go and find a cobbler somewhere, which I could do when I was in Bosnia or Morocco, but I can't really do to such an extent here. And that's the thing. I think we need mom and pop religions. I mean, not necessarily religions, don't get me wrong, but I think, communities. Like what we have is good, but I think we need more of a breakdown into smaller, close-knit communities rather than mega churches.
Oh, well, yes. I mean, when things get large, they need to be organized in smaller pieces. Otherwise, it becomes mechanical, impersonal.
And people start comparing them to corporations.
Yeah, they start to act like corporations.
True.
Corporations have more diversity in their structure than some religions.
Wouldn't it be interesting if the big religions were broken up as monopolies and you had a flowering of many more different viewpoints like you had in some other points, but not going back, but going forward?
Theta Badria, I think that should be your next book.
Okay.
I think that's just a wonderful idea, but it needs to be expressed as a story, not as what ifs.
I actually did decide that the next two things, inshallah, that I'm going to do once my current book is completely finished is some sort of work of fiction. And then there are two German books that I really want to translate that haven't been translated. Important things. And yeah, I'm trying to, right now in the book that I'm writing, put everything non-fictional that I have to say in there. And then after that, I feel like, all right, going from here on out, I want to write fiction or poetry.
Yeah, well, whatever seems right. There's a place for all of them.
I'm reminded of a quotation from, I think it's William Faulkner, who said he wrote novels because he had failed as a short story writer. Figured the people who wrote stories had failed at poetry.
Well, yeah, and sometimes the environment you want to express yourself in is incompatible with the message. And if you write fiction, you can create the environment in which the message fits.
Mm-hmm.
I think philosophical fiction is a bit like Rodney Dangerfield. It doesn't get enough respect. I really think, something like the Grand Inquisitor episode from Brothers Karamazov, or innumerable other examples, are really profound. And because they were written as a story, as fiction, they are able to impact people continuously over time. Whereas most nonfiction tends to crustify and ossify as time goes on.
Yes. Take the ideas in the Brothers Karamazov or Anna Karenina and try to imagine putting those in an essay.
Yeah.
Think of how deadly that would be.
What activities can help to make one happier?
Gratitude is one of them. I often feel when I have moments when I'm not so happy, then I look at things that I have and focus on just being grateful for having them.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that's an activity, but you're absolutely right about gratitude.
Well, the activity part is that I actually have a gratitude journal, believe it or not, that involves me to, this is something that I learned recently, helping a family member recover from depression. And it's a research-based fact backed by a lot of psychologists saying we tend not to talk about good things that happen to us.
Yes.
And we don't talk about them to others, and so we also forget to talk about them to ourselves. So they invented something called a gratitude journal, which is essentially a notebook where you write things that you are grateful for.
Yeah, so you don't forget. Gratitude is, ingratitude for the present moment is heresy.
Yes.
So listen up, everybody. Be grateful.
Be grateful, yes. This is reminiscent of some wisdom my mother gave me, which I quoted earlier in this week to someone, which was that if bad things happen to you, you can share that with just about anybody. But if something really good happens to you, you can only share it with your closest friends.
Yeah.
Ironic, but true.
Well, it is. And so much of we have this, who knows where it comes from, but this tendency to see problems. There's something to be solved, something to be overcome. But if there's always something that needs to be overcome, you've missed the transcendence in the first place. Let yourself be overcome. Don't try to overcome things. And additionally, your experience, your positive experience or negative experience, is made stronger in the sharing of it, in the relating of it. Why would you want to make the negative stuff stronger?
Yes, true.
And moreover, how charitable is it to share all your misery with somebody?
Well, it gives them a chance to practice compassion, of course.
Well, yeah, I might afford them a chance to practice compassion, yeah. I mean, there's nothing that no good can come out of. But, when we open our mouths, what are we spraying out there for other people to experience? And a lot of the talking about what you don't like is really more of an inner dialogue. And it's, like and don't like. Well, you could even like the fact that there are things you don't like. So I think gratitude is fundamental.
Yes, gratitude is fundamental and often forgotten about.
If you can't see the good wherever you are, there's something wrong.
Yes.
Even if you're in pain.
That's more difficult, but it's still true.
Yeah, pain is like a loud noise that you can't ignore sometimes, but it's not the only thing.
So what are the other activities that one can do to make themselves happy?
I often talk about finding something that's joyful and doing that.
Right. So you may not know what the activity is until you discover it makes you happy.
Yes, but I think you really do know things that bring you happiness and joy. And
Oh, yeah.
we just don't do them and make them a regular part of our lives.
Yeah, I really don't. And if you want to find it in the present moment, which is the only place you can find it, you may find that you find it in the present moment where you're engaged in a particular activity. Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah. Sayyida Badriya?
I think a lot of what you said I agree with, but simply one has to think what the first thing one has to do if they want to be happy is get rid of the things that make them unhappy. And focusing on the past or the future are the greatest ways to unhappiness. Fear is the great destroyer of happiness. So one has to make sure to live here in the present. They have to not be focused on the past or the future, and they have to get rid of fear. And if they can do that, that's goal number one. And second, as you were saying, I think find some activity that gives joy. And some activities do double duty by both giving joy and also heightening one's awareness and presence. So whether it's carving or knitting or doing some form of painting or art or music, these things can help one to be present here and now. That's the greatest way to happiness.
Yes. And, actually, what is the path about other than happiness and freedom? And I don't know if you can have either without the other.
We are placed here for a limited time. As such, would you consider it a sin to waste time in modern pursuits such as TV and video games, or is there a potential time for such things?
There's a time for everything under heaven, but I don't think there is anything that's inherently a sinful way to spend time other than to
be forgetful.
Yes, exactly. Always looking for an escape from the present moment.
Also, I think, we talk about TV and video games, and to the degree that they're overwhelming or obsessive, they're problematic in any number of reasons. But they fill a niche that has always been there and has been filled in traditional cultures by gaming of other kinds, like horse racing, archery. So we don't have horse racing and archery available immediately. But I sometimes feel that extremely busy conceptual day I live and more quiet part of life.
Yes.
And I will sometimes decide what I need is an hour of documentaries on television.
Sure.
And I do that.
Because, there are things you can do, whether it's a game or documentary or whatever, that gives you some freedom from yourself, from what you usually take to be yourself.
Well said. Well said.
And, it shows that it will show you that pleasure is available without a lot of thinking.
Yes,
exactly. Not that thinking is bad.
No.
But you don't know what thinking is unless you're able to not do it.
Point, yes. Other voices?
I also think that TV or video game in itself is not bad. What's bad or what happens is when we get attached to a thing. And so that attachment can also become an opportunity for self-inquiry. In that way, TV and video games would be something to be grateful for if they led a person to inquire as to why they're attached to it so much.
Yeah, well, that's true. Anything that you discover you have some negative experience because you're attached to it, because, rarely is there any other reason it would be negative. So there's always, when you find that you've got an attachment, looky there. You just found something really interesting.
I think one has to look at it both quantitatively and qualitatively. I think quantitatively, that's the easy thing. If you do anything in excess, it's going to be bad. And we all have different views about that. My view is that video games, any quantity is bad, just like any amount of heroin is bad. As for movies or television, I think you have to then look at that qualitatively and see that, does this thing bring you closer or take you farther away from the divine? And I would say there are a large number of very good films by Tarkovsky, Jodorowsky, Kurosawa, and many others that actually heighten one's awareness. But I would say most of popular culture, most of television is a drug meant to dull our senses and our brains. And in that sense, it's probably never a good idea to use it unless one needs that. And I would say if it came down to it, and one, let's say, has a really terrible day at work, and it's between watching a half an hour of idiotic comedy or taking an antidepressant pill, it's probably better to watch the television, but only in that circumstance.
Well, I think I need an hour of The Simpsons. I mean, the Smithsonian Channel.
Yeah. Well, there's a difference between doing something because it offers freedom from something else and doing something because you want to escape.
Good point.
And there's lots of, one of the problems I see that we have in the modern world is that people are presented with no end entertaining distractions.
Clearly.
And they don't have anything left over for anything else.
Clearly.
In that sense, it is like a drug.
Agreed.
I mean, most of what's available to do is not really worth it on its own. There has to be a better reason to do it, and that's the only thing that makes it important. Otherwise, there goes your life.
Yes, right. Gone.
Yeah.
I can't think of any better way to respond to this than to have this, to quote the quote from near the end of Brave New World, where the savage says, "I don't want comfort. I want God. I want poetry. I want real danger. I want freedom. I want goodness. I want sin." "In fact," said Mustafa Mond, "you're claiming the right to be unhappy." "All right," said the savage, "I'm claiming the right to be unhappy." And, I think maybe we have to claim the right to be unhappy in order to be happy.
Yeah. If there's no other option, then it's not a choice. It comes back to the thing that I frequently say is, what does it mean to say yes if you can't say no, and vice versa? It really doesn't mean anything, does it?
Yes. Anything more?
Well, as Bugs Bunny says, or is it Porky the Pig? Anyway, one of them says, "That's all, folks."
Yeah, I think that must be Porky, because Bugs Bunny doesn't have a stutter.
Ah, right. Okay.
At least we're quoting a sage as we end our conversation.
That's right. Always to close with a wise quote.
And tonight it's "That's all, folks."
And so it is.